All right, well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from the globe today for another exciting Veeam Live session. Today, you are joined by myself, Sam Nichols. I head up our public cloud product marketing team here at Veeam, responsible for all of the cloudy goodness. And I am joined by my friend and colleague, Mr. Jeff Reichard. Jeff, a few welcome words from you today.
Hi, everybody. Delighted to be here. My name is Jeff Reichard, and I work on the product strategy team in the office of the CTO.
Fun. Well, we've got an awesome session lined up for you today that is titled, What is Your Cloud Exit Strategy? And it's a bit of a bold statement. So before we get started, I do want to kind of clear up that we're under no illusions that the cloud's going away and everything's coming out of the cloud and coming back on premises. I don't want to give too much of the presentation away today, but ultimately just want to discuss that we understand that we live in a very, very hybrid world. There is the need for ownership and control over your data, whether you are moving that data from on-premises to the cloud or in the other direction. So that's kind of really what we're going to be talking about today. Before we do get started, though, we always like to have a look where everyone's joining us from across the globe. So I believe in the chat function, you have the ability to kind of let us know where you're from, and we're going to go through the map a couple of times throughout today's 30 minutes and see where you're from. So we've got our globe here, and it's a nice easy start for me, not really too testing on my geography. The easy one is myself. I am based in Wisconsin, where the weather's getting a little bit crisper. Really looking forward to a nice, long, cold, snowy winter. Our production guy, Mr. Mark, he is based in Atlanta, Georgia. Jeff, you're over in Connecticut, right?
Yep,
and
that's
then
right.
Catronell, heading up our social media, based out of Romania there. So that's where everyone's from right now. But let us know in the comments below where you're from, and we'll revisit this map a few times throughout the call. So let's get started and move on to some of our slides, which is really kind of where Jeff is going to take you through some of a Gartner report talking about SaaS lock-in risk. So Jeff, why don't you get us started on that first?
Sounds perfect. So this is a little change of pace. We normally talk about Veeam research, and we will be doing that later on. But this is the theme for today came from a Gartner report that was published just a couple of weeks ago. It came out September 13th. And the report is advice from two Gartner analysts on what customers should do when they're first negotiating a software as a service contract. Now, we're going to broaden our view beyond just software as a service, but we're going to start there because some of the points they made were really interesting. One of the things that they noted is that there is not a standard notification period that software as a service vendors have to give their customers before they terminate a contract. The standard for Google in the standard contract is only 15 days. SAP is more generous. Their standard period is 6 months, and it runs in between that for the other vendors that are out there. So it was really interesting to look at. And I think a lot of customers who sign up for software as a service customer contract services might not be aware, Sam, that if things go wrong, if their vendor chooses to terminate that contract, the standard terms might leave them really scrambling about how to figure out what to do with their data and how to stand up an alternate service. So it's very interesting to take a look at. The story, though, it continues the same kinds of warnings that Gartner's been giving customers for years now. There was actually 11 years ago a very influential Gartner analyst survey that was titled, Will Your Data Rain When the Cloud Bursts?, about one early cloud storage provider going out of business, a company called Nirvanix, and giving its customers 2 weeks to get all of their terabytes of data down out of the cloud. Now, they ended up extending that, but there are a lot of companies that initially had been wondering, well, do I want to spend $1,000 or $2,000 on this next month? And then they were thinking about, what do I have to provision storage hardware and send it to this data center and pull it out?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point around kind of retaining ownership of your data and being able to move it. You're talking about it from a lens of, if that service provider were to terminate the agreement for whatever reason. But talk to us a little bit about some of the reasons why a customer might choose to do that, right? The service provider, continues. The customer has just made that decision. Why might some organizations choose to repatriate or move data out of software as a service, be it on premises or maybe to another provider?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about some of the specific recommendations that Gartner makes about terminating. If you do decide that you're going to end this service, there are some very specific things that they point out. And one of those risks that they point out, one of the recommendations that they make is you really need to be aware of how you're going to get your data out. And you need to figure out, are you going to pay to get the data out? Or if the vendor terminates the service, will they help you? And that varies. Some say they will help you. SAP says get it out before contract expiration. Google says you'll be charged if you leave Google Apps for Business. You'll be charged for getting that data out. The things that can cause folks to leave this kind of a service range from miscalculating the egress charges that they'll have for data. I had a federal customer who actually moved a large database that was critical to their organization up into the public cloud. What they didn't realize is that they had literally hundreds of sites nationwide that were pulling data out of that database regularly, and they exceeded their first year's budget for that service in the first month. And so they very quickly decided that they were going to change things. The recommendation that the Gartner report makes, though, around this is be aware you might want to change because of egress fees, because you have security concerns, because you have staffing concerns, or one thing that the report mentions quite a bit. You might find that you need different skill sets to run things in the cloud, and you don't have those, and it's easier to run them on premises. Or for other reasons, data retention requirements or data governance requirements. I see that quite a bit with public sector customers, particularly in law enforcement. There are some things that they're not willing to move up to the public cloud because they don't feel comfortable about it. The point of the Gartner survey, though, talking about software as a service, is when you're negotiating the standards for this, you need to think about what your costs might end up being for getting the data out, for reskilling your people on a new platform, for reintegrating a new service or a back on-prem service with your systems, all of these kind of things, just the cost of cleansing the data and reformatting it if you go to a different service, all these things can add a lot of cost. And it's much better if you think about that up front instead of in a fire drill because you or your vendor have decided to cancel the service.
So really interesting point that you make about thinking about that upfront. And I think that it's something that organizations commonly overlook as they start to adopt public cloud services, right? And the Gartner report is looking at this through a software as a service lens, but I think that we can take those same learnings and understandings from that report and apply it equally to other services available within the public cloud. Infrastructure as a service like Amazon EC2, Azure VMs, Google Compute Engine instances, to platform as a service as well. So things like Amazon RDS, Azure SQL databases, so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through the hundreds of services out. But the one common thing, and again, I think we'll get to this in a little bit, is around data, right? The data is always yours. You retain ownership of that data, and you have responsibility to protect and secure that data. And I think one of the things that again folks overlook is that looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years into the future as to what might happen with my data that I've chosen to instantiate in these cloud services in the future. We are, as a company, starting to see folks repatriate data back on premises. We're seeing folks develop applications and services within the public cloud, but they had the intent to run those services on premises originally anyway, and that's in the next slide. If we could bring that up on the screen here. It is part of our cloud protection trends report. It's on the right hand side here, but 23% of folks say that they developed that workload within the public cloud, but they'd already planned to run that in production within a data center. Some folks had migrated workloads that existed already from on-premises to the cloud and decided to bring them back. And some folks are looking at this through a disaster recovery lens, right? A service went down, they instantiated it in the cloud for a finite period of time, and of course, they're always going to bring that back on premises. So, again, really ultimately interesting to see that, yes, we're talking about this hybrid cloud acceleration and this huge shift towards the public cloud. And I don't think that that's going to slow down, but we need to have that foresight and understand that there are limitations within the cloud. And we need to understand those and be able to have that ownership and control over our data to be able to do what we want with it, right? If we want to move it from one cloud to another, from cloud back on premises. And we can look at a number of publicly available examples out there. One of the great things about the United States is freedom of information. So we just can look at the SEC, right? Security and Exchange Commission. It is a federal agency. And Dropbox, which is a cloud storage service in and of itself, were leveraging a cloud storage service to run their entire business. And before they IPO'd, I think it was 2018, maybe 2019, they decided to bring a vast number of services that they were running in that other public cloud services to an on-premises managed data center, and in the end saved themselves $75 million, which upped their IPO quite significantly. It's again just really interesting to see that cloud is great to start off. It's great because we can really quickly start up these services. We can scale them very quickly, but as these applications and services mature, they grow in terms of scale, in terms of data, in terms of performance requirements. That cost benefit of the cloud can start to become very, very significant, where running it on premises it starts to make more sense.
Yep, absolutely.
That was a lot there.
No, that's good. And it's what's interesting, you point out people bringing workloads that they've developed in the cloud back on premises for economic reasons. But if we go to the next slide, there's other reasons that people do this too. And we have highlighted here, you'll notice these are all in light green and dark green, but we've got network outages highlighted here or storage hardware outages highlighted here. That's a significant issue, and there have been some cases, Sam, exactly like you've mentioned, where some hyperscale public clouds have had storage that has lapsed, storage that's gone away in the past couple of years. Obviously, this happens on-prem too, but you have to be aware that all of these causes of outages that apply to on-prem that we're used to dealing with can also apply when you move stuff up to the public cloud. So it's something to think about. Specifically around data, when we look at that, one of the things, Sam, I know you have this conversation with folks when you're talking to them as well, and I do, and folks on my team do too. It's always helpful to talk about who's actually responsible for your data, regardless of where it is. And if we go to the next slide, this is just one cloud vendor's shared responsibility model. This is Microsoft. If you've ever done any certs for any cloud, whether it's Azure, whether it's AWS, whether it's software as a service, you've seen some variant of this. The Microsoft one is nice to look at, though, Sam, because it runs the gamut from software as a service to what you have on-prem. So do you want to talk us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we run through that, should we take a quick look at the map and take a look where people are joining us for, and then we'll start to dissect the wonderful shared responsibility models. So let's start off with North America. I'm going to say Washington, D.C., and it looks like I have an extremely high resolution image of the United States there, but I just saw the comment of Washington, D.C. But moving down, we've got Puerto Rico there. We've got some parts of Latin America, South America, if we can move to that view. Okay, so like Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia. Moving over to Europe, let's take a look there. Not many new folks joining us from Europe, unless some more folks have joined from Romania. Move over to Africa. You can see a North African country there. So looks like we got Palestine, Iran. I believe that's Algeria. And then let's take a look over to our friends in Asia. Okay, so Singapore. Great. Awesome. So we've got a nice worldly cohort joining us today. We appreciate you joining from across the world. Jeff and I are talking about, ultimately how to retain ownership of your data and be able to do what you want with it, whether that's on-prem, in the cloud, and however you want to move it. And what we're about to get onto was something called the shared responsibility model. So Jeff gave us a good tee up with the slide, which we'll bring back up now, which is Microsoft's shared responsibility model. And again, Jeff's mentioned that this is a great one because it shows us the different degrees of as a service and how responsibility varies. I think, irrespective of whether it's AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or any other, as a service or cloud offering, the important thing to understand is that as we, migrate data to the cloud or instantiate data in the cloud, depending on the service, we transfer varying degrees of responsibility to that service provider, right? So you can see in Microsoft's model, on-premise is responsible for everything. So we start to go to infrastructure, we move responsibility of managing, maintaining, upgrading physical hosts, networks, the actual data center itself, and more as we move to platform as a service, software as a service. But that information, that data is always our responsibility. All right. So we've always got that responsibility to secure and protect that. And I think that is a common misconception when people move to the cloud, is that, oh, well, they're going to take care of all of that. I don't need to do it anymore. Microsoft, Azure, GCP, everyone explicitly states, still your data, you retain the responsibility to secure and protect that. Part of that is through well-architected frameworks. Part of that is through, different pieces of security software or concepts within the cloud. But another part is around backup and recovery, right? So, Jeff, do you want to talk to us a little bit about backup in the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. This case is interesting when we look at Microsoft, because just in the news earlier this year, there was actually a disgruntled employee who deleted 1,200 Microsoft inboxes from Office 365, 1,200 accounts from his company's Office 365 environment. And it took them, that poor fellow ended up going to jail for 2 years for getting angry and doing that. But it took his company months to get all the data back from various sources because they didn't have a consolidated backup for it. It's kind of an interesting story, Sam, because I think a lot of us tend to think that sort of thing doesn't actually happen, or you're okay. And it was quite a wake-up call for the IT service provider that guy worked for. And I've talked to customers who have actually had similar experiences through misconfigurations, through user error. We saw the slide before about IT outages. There are a lot of things that can happen, and user error or malware or someone getting unhappy and doing something rash are definitely things that actually do take place. So fortunately, we've got some good solutions for that to help people with protecting this kind of data and to help with mobility around the planned decision to bring data back on premises or to migrate to the cloud, Sam, as you discussed before. So why don't we take a look at the next slide? You want to walk us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a Veeam mantra through and through right here on the slide, which is any cloud your way. For those that are familiar with Veeam, I think you know us as the ones that pioneered purpose-built agentless backup and recovery for virtual machines. But we do much more than that in our, I don't even know, 16 years of existence. We've added physical machines, but we've also added a lot of cloud native backup and recovery capabilities. All right, so we can also protect natively workloads in AWS and Azure, GCP, Microsoft 365. With our recent acquisition of Kasten, our ability to protect containerized workloads in Kubernetes, right, which we know 50% of those are running in the public cloud. So, Veeam's mantra when it comes to backup and recovery is we can protect everything, whether it's private cloud, public cloud, whether you do that on a hybrid model, a multi-cloud model, and then from what's the word I'm looking for? From just a utilization perspective, I guess, whether you want to do that self-managed or as a service through one of our tens of thousands of Veeam Cloud and service provider partners, we really give you that choice and flexibility of what you want to protect, however you want to protect it. But one of the big things is around mobility, right? The majority of the solutions within the Veeam platform leverage this common backup file format called the VBK. And what's really critical to that is mobility. we can help you move your data as you see fit, whether you want to move data to the cloud, from one cloud to another, within different regions or accounts within the same cloud, or whether you want to move that data from the cloud back on premises. Ultimately, Veeam just wants to give you the purpose-built tool sets to properly protect, manage, control, and own your data wherever it might live today, and also help you move that data. And it's not just a technological capability, but it's also a licensing scheme as well. We have this wonderful thing called the Veeam Universal License, which again is capable of protecting or licensing protection of different workloads across multiple different platforms. So we make it incredibly easy to protect your data wherever it lives now, to move that data wherever you want it to be in the future, and then continue to protect it when it lands at its new destination for however long that might be.
Yeah, excellent points. And it's especially important if you take a look. We know this, and our research internally at Veeam bears this out. But the slide that's up now shows this is from the 2020 Flexera State of the Cloud report, which is a well-regarded survey that comes out every year. Good number of respondents, typically a couple of thousand, and they survey folks and ask them, what exactly are you doing with cloud? If you look, the number of people who have either single private cloud infrastructure, that is, everything is on-prem, or a single public cloud provider is almost negligible. It's 7% if you add those up. Fully 93% have multiple public cloud providers that they're working with, which is why that mobility, Sam, that you were just talking about is so critical. If I've got a common tool that can back things up, whether the workloads are in GCP, whether they're in AWS, whether they're in Azure, and then not just recover, but actually in many cases, recover and convert format automatically with Veeam's capability of doing that, then it really, really gives me a lot of options. What's cool about what Veeam offers for software as a service with our backup for Office 365 is that we've done this for virtual machines, for infrastructure as a service, and VMs on-prem for a while. But now we give folks the same kind of mobility and data custody for their Microsoft 365 environment.
Yeah, wonderful points. And we don't actually have a slide for this, and I kind of regret not putting it in there now, but it's from our Data Protection Report 2021. And I know it off pat, so you're just going to have to listen to me talk about it. But we asked essentially the question, like, what does modern look like to you in 2021 when it comes to data protection? And, no surprises, a lot of security things are up there, but out of the top 9 things, more than half of them were very, very cloud oriented, right? So we live in this very, very cloudy world. Hybrid cloud is not something that's new. It's full acceleration. But 3 really, really important points out of those top 9. Number 1 was the ability to move workloads from on-premises to the cloud. So again, to help continue that acceleration of the public cloud. Number 2 was the ability to move workloads from one cloud to the other. So this is that multi-cloud environment that you were just talking about. And you did touch on this last point, but it was the standardization of protection, right? We know that there are multiple vendors out there that are capable of protecting all of these different environments, physical on-prem, virtual on-prem, AWS, Azure, GCP, containers. But Veeam has this single platform, this common control plane to protect everything everywhere. So instead of, multiple disparate tool sets, which are a costly, complex nightmare to manage from multiple different vendors, we just help you unify that under that common control plane, that single Veeam platform, to again help you not only mobilize that data as we've discussed, but really streamline the management of everything as well.
Absolutely. And that can have real advantages for customers. That I know the conversations that I have with customers, Sam, and I'm sure the same with you. If we take a look at the next slide and we talk with customers about what they're doing around protecting their data in the cloud or protecting their data to the cloud, the first item is we want to protect it so that we can get risk out of the way as a roadblock to cloud adoption, right? I've had this conversation with customers multiple times. I remember one gentleman told me they had done a successful pilot of Microsoft 365, But before they could actually do the production migration, he had a member of his board come to the data center, sit down at the console, and see that they could restore that data back on-prem. And that had to happen before they would do the migration. So it's very real, the conversations we have with people about de-risking cloud adoption as being a really critical thing. And of course, data protection lets you do that. Another thing, you mentioned our service provider community before as well. One of the common uses that we see people wanting to do, and it's the last bullet point here, is get security or disaster recovery up to the cloud. Before, maybe having multiple sites on premises and in the cloud, it was prohibitive. They couldn't do that. Now, if they can do DR to the cloud, then they can really automate that. And frequently they choose to do that with a service provider too, because it just makes it easier.
Absolutely. And the point in the middle is around actualizing savings in the cloud, right? You know, the cloud has this really interesting pay-as-you-go model, right? No longer do we have to go out there and procure, manage, maintain, upgrade all of this physical infrastructure and, you know, sometimes platforms and software on premises. We can just go out and with the swipe of a credit card and a few bits of information, go out and spin those services up immediately. But, you know, one of the problems is that can spiral out of control pretty quickly. So, you know, Veeam, not only can we help you protect that data, not only can we help you secure that data, govern that data, not only can we help you mobilize that data, but we can also help you actualize those savings in the cloud. So from a technological perspective, we're built in to leverage those cloud native concepts to help reduce costs. But then we also give you things like capacity planning, backup cost forecasting built within the tools. So before you even commit to, data protection within the cloud, you have a very good idea how much that's going to cost you from, an infrastructure standpoint, from a networking standpoint. So you don't just get this big surprise bill of thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of dollars at the end of the month. It's all there in front of you. So I think the big one is just doing it all with confidence. Like you said, Jeff, wherever it lives, it's always protected. You've got insights and you've ultimately got ownership and control over that data. So if it does ever exceed what your expectations, or not meet, I guess, your expectations of that cloud, you can move it wherever you want to with Veeam.
Yep, absolutely. Well, folks, I know we're getting near the end of our time today. Thank you so much for joining us live. I hope this has been a useful conversation. The Gartner research was fun to read. It's also always a pleasure getting back into some of the large amounts of Veeam research that we do. And I think you'll be hearing more about that. But in the meantime, please join us again on this Friday, October 8th. We have a viewer's choice live session that'll be based on the results of an existing LinkedIn viewer poll. And that poll is still active. So if you haven't voted in it, the chat, it will have that link for that. Yep, take a look at the chat. This Friday, Rick, Melissa, and Kirsten from the Office of the CTO here at Veeam will tackle an existing Veeam capability in detail. So take a look at the capabilities and put in your vote, and they will talk about what you want to talk about. Also be aware that next Monday, October 11th, Jason Buffington and Dave Russell are going to be returning to the LinkedIn Live broadcast a week from today, and they'll be talking about how data sprawl is affecting data protection strategy. And I promise you that we will be looking at more Veeam research and also at Dave and Jason's extensive experience in this area to talk about that. And finally, one more quick update. 2 days after that, or 3 days, depending on where you are, October 13th and October 14th of next week. So that is, they're coming up October 13th for the Americas and October 14th for Asia Pacific and for EMEA. We have the update to our annual large VeeamON user conference. So that is the VeeamON update show, October 13th and 14th. Free still to register for. We'll be covering topics around Veeam and cloud, ransomware, Kubernetes, and a whole lot more. So if you haven't signed up for that, please go ahead and do that. And I think we're going to have something telling you a little bit more about that right now. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.